I love the intro. I can't help it. I'm sitting over here dancing to it, like getting ready to go. All right, friends. So we are joined here today. I am so excited to be bringing you one of the top experts in the field today, and I don't want to waste a whole lot of time on intros because Sean has a boatload of really great information today for us about proposal management superstitions. And this presentation came out of a conversation that we had a few months ago where we were talking about, hey, are these buying behaviors actually real? And Sean is one of the most academic, I will say, in my opinion, and one of the most thoughtful proposal management professionals that I've seen in the space today. My name is Ren. I am the Chief Ingredients Officer here at Proposal Industry Experts. This is a record-breaking webinar today. I think we have the highest attendance out of any that we've set so far. So big news for Sean. Yeah, big news for everybody here at Proposal Industry Experts. Some housekeeping before we get started with the presentation. Number one, if you've got comments or questions, please drop those into the stage comments, and then we can route those to Sean as it feels appropriate during the conversation. Also, feel free to drop a little comment into the space saying hello and telling us a little bit about who you are as an attendee. We're really glad to have you here. Aside from that, we will have a period, I believe, of time for questions and answers at the end. Is that correct, Sean?
Yeah.
Wonderful. So don't be shy. Have that conversation. React. We're going to have some interactive elements from what I understand. So I'm super excited. Yeah. But without any further ado, here's Sean, and let me get your presentation queued up while you give yourself an intro.
All right. Well, hey, thanks so much, Ren, and thanks for having me. So, yeah, we're going to talk about some of the common, not misconceptions, but things that we, different, best practices that we might take as superstitions sometimes. So a little bit about what we're going to talk about today. As soon as I get this to work. Thank you. Okay. Introduce kind of the topic, what we're talking about, and overall thought behind it. We'll talk about a couple of just standard best practices that we talk about that we might get a little dogmatic about sometimes. Like client name, go, no go, language, and then just wrap it all up at the end and have some time for question and answer. But getting started, best practices can often become superstitions when we really don't understand where they come from or when they're appropriate to use or not use. And one thing I do want to make clear is I'm not going to cover process so much, like red team, gold team, all that. That's not so much my area of expertise, but I want to talk about something more fundamental. And that is, at our core, what we do as proposal managers and writers is we try to influence decisions. So I'm going to look at some of the superstitions or best practices around how our clients are influenced and how our proposals influence our clients to choose our company or get our proposal to win. So about me, like Fred said, I'm Sean. Thanks for checking out my presentation, especially on a Friday, no less. If you guys want to contact me, here's my contact info. One thing I do got to warn you guys, I tend to drink obscene amounts of coffee, and I kind of had a little more than usual today. So if I talk fast, just let me know. I also tend to geek out about this kind of stuff. So just, put a note or have Ren just say, hey, Sean, slow down. But with that, some of the objectives, at the end of this presentation, what I'm hoping you get from this is to understand the research behind some of these best practices, understand limitations in some best practices, and most importantly, where to get more information and how to critically evaluate research to form your own conclusions. And so my goal is not to cover every single best practice. It's really to instill a mindset. And I think the best way to kind of explain that mindset is two quotes that I really like. The first one, the Dalai Lama, know the rules well so you can break them effectively. And also Picasso, learn the rules like a professional so you can break them like an artist. Best practices are like tools. Like a razor blade and a saw both cut, but you wouldn't use a razor blade to cut down a tree. Best practices are the same. They don't always fit a given circumstance. And as a proposal professional, it's up to you to understand the strengths, limitations, and the best use of each tool that you have at your proposal. So think of best practices like that, like tools, and less like commandments, you must do this, a lot less. I mean, look, if you don't follow best practice, the proposal guards aren't going to smite thee. It's just they're best practices or ideas. And the one thing too I want to talk about is not all best practices are created equal. You have a continuum there. On one side you have opinion. Someone comes in and say, no, I think this is the best way to do it. Okay. Do they have, 10, 20 years of experience? Yeah, I'm going to listen to that. Even a new person just into it, I might listen because they might have something that I've not considered. But it's not as certain, and as you get more experience, yeah, maybe a little more certain. But then, you start getting into things like, it's not research, but I do have some data that backs up what I'm saying. Okay, I'm going to listen, I'm going to be a little more certain about that. Then there's also research that, it's an article, like whether it's SMPS or was it APMP, something like that, where, yeah, it's not peer-reviewed academic research, but yeah, I'm going to, look at that a little bit more, be a little more certain about that. And then you have peer-reviewed studies that are in academic journals. That I'm going to listen to a little bit more, but there is a catch. There's not much research out there that really talks about like proposals specifically. So it's not specific to proposals. You got to kind of make inferences and see and assess if it's really going to apply to what you're doing. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. And then the most certain is if there's a research article that is peer reviewed and specifically about proposals, okay, then you can be certain. So it's all, it's all this continuum, and you really have to look at, what is your best judgment on, is this really true or not in this circumstance that you're working on? So now we talked a little about that. I do want to do a little activity, and we're going to come back to this later. But what we're going to do is we are actually going to memorize this entire list in about a minute and a half, 2 minutes. All right. So here's what we're going to do, and I'm going to walk you through this. We take each number. So look at the first one, pen. Number 1, pen. So what I want you to do, think in your mind, 1, pen. What is a word that rhymes with 1? So 1, sun. Now what I want you to do, 1, sun. Imagine a pen with a bunch of suns printed on it. So 1, sun, pen with a bunch of suns on it. 2, blue. Okay, imagine 2, blue, a blue computer. So picture a blue computer in your head. Next, 3. What rhymes with 3? Tree. Imagine a chair in a tree. So 3, tree. Picture in your mind a chair in a chair in a tree. 4, floor, the floor, right? Picture a rock sitting on the floor. 4, floor, a rock on the floor. 5, beehive, right? So 5, hive, a hat. So imagine a hat sitting on a beehive. So 5, hive, hat on a beehive. 6, sticks. Imagine a door made of sticks. So 6, sticks, door made of sticks, all right? 7, heaven, right? So imagine like this bottle like flying up to the pearly gates, so 7, heaven, bottle going to heaven. 8, gate. 8, gate, there's paper on a gate. 9, line. 9, line, tables in a line. So picture tables in a line. And then 10, hen. So imagine a hen sitting on a pillow, right? So 10, hen sitting on a pillow. So we're going to come back to that, and you'll be surprised how much of this you remember. But now let's get into some of the best practices. And this is the one that actually kicked off this whole presentation, the whole conversation, is using client names and, in a proposal. So the superstition that comes across, or the best practice that becomes a superstition, is always use the client's name. Well, yeah, but it can capture attention. But research has found that the effect is kind of short-lived and only works in certain circumstances. I mean, think about it. The client name, the agency name, is not the reviewer's name. So yeah, it might have some effect, but it may not be as important as actually, coming up with effective win themes or tailoring the information to their project. hearing an actual person's name in the proposal, yeah, it makes sense. I mean, think the cocktail party effect, right? You're at a party, you hear your name, and you're like, what? So that's something that does happen, but it doesn't always work, and it's very short-lived, and it can actually have the opposite effect. Think about it. If you're reviewing a proposal and your name is not publicly listed on the RFP, and a client lists your name in a proposal as someone they're going to work with, it might kind of creep you out. So you got to be kind of careful and really judge whether or not you want to use that. But names may not always work, but what usually does work is first and second person pronouns can actually be more persuasive. And by that, what I mean, first person, you, like I, me, we, our, and second person, you and your. I always argue with people because a lot of times they'll say the client or the agency's so-and-so. It's like, no, your staff, you, we will work with you, not listen to the client's name. Because that makes it a little more personal. And I'll even go as far as say, we will work together on this. I will say we, because we kind of also implies the other person. And it actually will be a little bit more effective than just generic, third person, calling formal names all the time. There's some research on this, but what I think is really going on with this is a huge, this is a big concept in behavioral economics. It's something called the endowment effect. So back in 1990, Kahneman, Netsch, and Thaler did this study, and they actually won the Nobel Prize in economics for this study. And what they did is, I call it the coffee mug experiment. So they basically gave two groups, here's coffee mugs, and here's make up money, right? And then over here, this group had like these tokens that they could buy and trade, and also, fake money. And the thought was how much people were willing to buy someone else's mug or a token or whatever would be roughly equal to how much they were willing to accept for their own. And the funny thing was, in every single study, whenever it was a coffee mug, they were less likely to be willing to give that up. And it's funny, it's not that, they just like coffee, it's actually what they found, and with any other object, what they found is that when you grab something or touch something or hear something's yours, you tend to put more value on whatever it is that you think is yours. So when you say things like, here is your team for this project, that becomes theirs. And then you start giving them that endowment effect. So again, it's not end all be all, but it is something that probably does, nudge people in the right direction, and also give them it just makes your proposal a little more persuasive, makes it like it's theirs. The other thing too is go and no-go assessments. Now, I will always speak out about this and argue about this with people, but one thing I've often heard is go, no-go questionnaires can't predict win probability. I've heard people take one extreme where it's, no, it doesn't work, it's useless. Others where it's like, no, if it says a no-go, you must not go. And most people, are in between. But for me, what I will tell people is if your go, no-go form doesn't have a positive correlation to winning, you're either not asking the right questions or not asking them in the right way. And yes, if you haven't noticed, I have quoted myself on this one. This is something that I always tell people because there are ways that you can make this really lead to or give you an indication if you win or lose. But, there's a couple things. First, you have to ask the right questions. And so you have to start somewhere. And so there's an article that was in the SMPS magazine years ago about, what you need to do to win. And so the researchers, they asked some questions and they just did a percentage of, hey, this many firms who won a project did this. And some of the questions, like, hey, did you or someone in your firm meet the client? How many meetings did you have before the RFP was released? Those are all different things that are a good starting point. While they could have done a little bit more data collection, it gives you a really good starting point. And I guarantee you probably, if you ever had a go, no go form, it's probably somewhat similar to some of these questions that are in this article. So you have the questions, but you also need to ask them in the right way. And the way we do that, in virtually all polls and social science research is based on something called the wisdom of the crowd, or also known as summated rating scales. We actually have, this is all of social sciences, all polls is based on these concepts. And we actually have a cow to thank for that. Not that particular cow, but a cow. And what I mean is, back in the 1800s, there was a common game at county fairs where they would have a cow, and people would go up, pay like, whatever it was, a little bit of money to put a guess on how much that cow weighed. And whoever got the closest won. So this mathematician was at one of these fairs and was looking at that and was looking at everyone's guess. And he noticed that the guesses varied wildly. They were all over the place. But when he took the average of everyone's guess, it was only within a few pounds of the actual weight. And so that's what we mean by the wisdom of the crowd. And so that's why a lot of times you want to take an average of everyone's scores to get a closer or more accurate result. So individuals' guesses can vary wildly, but the average is, usually much closer to the individual guesses. So here's a quick activity. What I want to ask you is, this jar is 12 inches tall, but it's not fully filled. It's about 5.5, 6 inches in diameter. How many gumballs do you think are in that jar? So what I'd like for you guys to do is I want you guys in the chat to put in your guess. How many gumballs you think are in that jar? And Rand is going to take them and get the average of them. And while we're doing that, I want to go back. I know I see some comments. I know, Sherry, you made a really good point. Go, no go, not about determining like win. If it's a real project. Yeah. The one thing I don't want to imply is you have to make it like, it has to be like, if it's no go, we don't go. It's actually just a tool, and it helps to know like if it leads to a win and it correlates to a win. But again, it's not the end all be all. Sometimes you don't have much of a chance, but it's a project and you have to go anyways because of whatever reason. So there are some times, it is a good exercise to go through, even if it doesn't correlate, but you can make it correlate and provide much more information. All right, so we're getting some, let's go another few seconds. Oh, thank you, Sherry. I got the clap.
We are working on our average here, and we're dangerously close. It looks like we're about 347.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
About 347.
Yeah, and I know how big the gumballs are. They are about 3/4 of an inch. Okay, so you guys ready for the answer? So, Rand, what was the number?
Yeah, so the average that was put into the chat was 347. It might be slightly skewed by these smaller ones that just came in.
Okay, that's fine. So 347, actually, I'm hoping to skew smaller. And I'm looking at the results. They're like wild, like 150, 500. There's a big gap, right?
Okay, here, let me do it real quick. Let's see. Okay. Average in 473, 427, 200 and 250. Thank you, ChatGPT. That's what's happening here. No whammies. 344. Sorry, and 250. Yeah, so it's about 344.
344?
Yep.
All right. Well, we are less than 10% from the actual number.
What? How many gumballs are in there?
327.
That's bananas.
So
that's
if
bananas.
You look at it, guys, some people 427, some people 250, 500. But when you take the average, you got really close. And so that's why That's what they call about summative rating scales. You take the sum of everything, and that usually cancels out the outliers or the really high and really low guesses. And so you can use this in proposals. And a couple things you want to know about, like number one, we tend to overestimate our chances. And because of that, each question should be based on an objective behavior. Also, only cover one piece of information and have clearly defined answer criteria. So what I usually do with the go, no go is I usually don't rely on just one person. I have multiple people do it, and either you have them fill out a form individually and you average the scores, but that's not always practical. So the other way to do it is you meet as a group and you come to consensus on the number. And that tends to work too, not as well, but it does help. And the funny thing is, we definitely tend to overestimate our chances. If you have a go, no go form with like a minimum cutoff score to go, I will tell you something. Like I can almost guarantee your average score is going to be close to that cutoff, if not higher. If you look at, which is fine, but are you winning more than 50% of every proposal? If so, yeah, your go, no go would be higher. But I can almost guarantee all these go, no go forms, all these go, no go scores on the items and also on the questions will actually be a little bit higher because people overestimate your chances. And this is one way to kind of cut that back. But also the way you write the questions, objective behavior. So here's an example. It's not the best. I just wrote this really fast, just to kind of give you an idea. But if you look at this, how many times have you discussed this project with the client in the past 6 months? Clearly defined behavior, time frame. Number one, we haven't, and it's in the blackout period. 2, 1 to 2 times or not about this project. 3 to 4 times each about this project, 5 or more times, or hey, we helped develop the project. Now I'm not saying you should copy this and use this. And this is just something that I threw together. It would be a starting point and I would refine it as I go. But the cool thing is with this format, you can start doing more data analysis. And so a simple thing you can do in Excel, you just list every question, in a field, you have the total, and then you have another one where it's, 1 if you lost, 2 if you win. And with that in Excel, you can actually do, you can do the average score, you can do standard deviation. Standard deviation, basically what that tells you is how much each individual score varies from the average score. And why that's important is if the higher the number, the more likely it is that you're not as consistent on that measure. So if this question, for example, had a high standard deviation, I'd be like, well, we don't do well on doing this consistently. So you can also do a correlation. It should correlate positively to a win. My last firm, the first go no go form we had actually had a negative correlation. So we rewrote it and we got positive correlations like 0.6, 0.7. And it's not great, but it's enough to say, look, there is something behind this. And it's not the end all be all. It's just one more data point that you should be more certain about all of your chances so you can make better decisions. You can even do something called a linear regression, which basically will tell you every single question, how much that question contributes to whether or not you win or lose. And the cool thing about that is it'll tell you and your sales team where to put your efforts and where you have the biggest bang for your buck, so to speak. So there's a lot of things you can do. Any questions, definitely please run over, just contact me because it's a lot of fun. Yeah. And I just thought, yeah, thanks. Yeah. It's R value. It's really easy to do. Once you know what the things mean, it's very powerful and it gives you more pull when you're telling someone like, yeah, we shouldn't go for this as well. So that's go, no go. And I'll stop geeking out about data. I promise, maybe. Now, the other thing is color choice. Now, we hear this a lot, right? I always get, it doesn't matter what colors, just use what looks good or don't use red. I've had that so many times. I actually had a firm owner just mandate you cannot use red on a proposal. And I'm like, why? Like, really? I've even had at a large firm, our corporate color was orange, and the environmental group refused to use orange on their proposals. So we had to flip things around. But actually, colors can enhance your message if you select it correctly, even red. Because we're actually hardwired to pay attention to red. Like if anyone's hooked up to an EEG, you'll start seeing activity. And yes, I see you can't see writing in red very well. The one thing I do want to preface with this is there are some people who are colorblind. So one thing that I do is you use, there's some apps out there that can actually mimic what someone with color blindness would see. And so sometimes that does help too, just check to make sure that they can read it. But when I'm talking about, when I use red, I don't put red all over the place. If it's red writing, it's in bold because it's a call out and it's only a small portion of the text. I'm not doing like paragraphs in red. But it can, bring attention to like a key call out that you really want the client to see. And you also want to look at, and awesome, we're sending the information, cool. For that, great. There are different colors, have different meanings. Now this isn't like the end all be all this is just a real quick, I grabbed from a book on color theory. And there's more colors out there and there's more research out there. But, generally, blue, wisdom, competence, and calm, think of firms that really rely on trust and competence, lawyers, finance, their logos are usually almost always blue of some sort. Red, attention, excitement, blue, green, nature and growth, and orange, warmth and kindness. And so the colors you use should either reinforce your brand identity, and also your key message. And I just saw Sherry color set different associations in different cultures. Thank you, because there's 2 words of caution I want to use, and that deals with one of them. First off, while impactful, the effect is a little moderate and can be overshadowed by other elements in your proposal. So using a certain color is not a hill I will die on, so to speak. It's like, whatever, I'll let it go. But if you use it right, it will nudge things in your way. The other thing, and to what Sherry mentioned in the comments, is meanings behind color are heavily dependent on culture. So if you're sending to a diverse group, you're on an international proposal, going to somewhere else, you really need to be careful about what colors you use and really understand the context in that culture. For example, in Brazil, purple is generally considered unlucky sometimes because customarily purple and black are worn to funerals. Similar to in Chinese culture, black and white are considered unlucky and they're funeral colors. I learned that one time. It was kind of a funny story. In college, I worked at the Red Cross. We did an event for Chinese New Year. Someone, it wasn't me, thank God, bought decorations, and they were these really nice lanterns, Chinese paper lanterns. Then they had Chinese characters for like joy and happiness and fortune, and they were black and white. Our chief accountant, Judy, she was born and raised in China. She walks in, she starts laughing like hysterically. And I'm like, what's going on? And she's like, those lanterns say happy, joy, luck, but they're all black and white. Those are something that we would see at a funeral. So it's important to understand the connotation that it has. And there's a lot of different resources out there, but that is something that you want to be aware of. The next thing we're going to talk about, now we're talking about visual colors, image use. So one thing I always hear, maybe this is just me, but photos must be of the project. You must include project photos. Well, I got to be honest, I worked for a firm that did groundwater wells, and I'm not really filling a proposal with pictures of holes in the ground or dirt, right? It's like, no, we're not doing this. Or I get a bunch of pictures back from the technical teams like, oh, we got a bunch of photos, put them in. And I'm looking at them, I'm like, this is broken concrete. Yeah, I don't think so. So yes, it's good to have, you want to have good images of the project. That's always good. But sometimes it's not possible. I mean, it's a very abstract project. And so if a photo, though, relates to the project in an abstract way, it can still be effective as long as it has meaning for the client, or what we call salience. So what I mean by that, there are some things that you can look at in photos to up the effectiveness. The first thing are haptic cues. They can increase purchase intention. So basically, a haptic cue is anything on an object in an image that indicates something is to be grabbed or handled. So in this case, it's the coffee mug, or actually more specifically, the handle on the mug is the haptic cue. And the cool thing is, what research has found is that if you include an image of a haptic cue in any kind of advertisement, brochure, whatever, it increases purchase intention. But it doesn't have to have anything to do with whatever it is you're selling, whether it's a service or product. It can just be in the background. And just by being there, it actually does create a slight increase. So if it's something like, for example, you have a picture of your project manager sitting at a desk, have like a coffee mug or something, and have it oriented to where it's kind of like favors the person or the viewer's right side, because that will actually increase purchase intention. And this has been done with products. This has been done with abstract services. It does create a bit of a increase. The one thing I will caution, though, is it's not a huge, it's a consistent increase, but it's not huge. It's like 2 or 3%. But if you do it consistently, throughout the sales process, you might have more. It's going to add up and have a bigger effect. The other thing you want to look at is psychological distance. What that means is a person's perceived distance from an event or an object or a need in either time or space. So for example, if you need retirement planning, right? But you're 30, 40 years off from retiring, that's far psychological distance because it's far away in time. If you're about to retire, that's closer, and it also works on spatial. Let's say you need a doctor and they're close, and you're advertising to a client that's close by. That's space, that's close. So basically, look at things that look closer. So if you match the customer's perceived distance to the event or product in time or space, it can increase purchase intention. And there's a lot of cool ways you can do it. You can have things like look close up in an image. The other thing that I like to do is perceived distance from the horizon is also effective. And so, for example, if I'm going after pursuing a proposal, and it's for long-term transit planning, like 20 years in the future, I'm going to pick something like at the top where it's the horizon is low in the visual field, so it looks farther away. But if it's something where it's a fast turnaround project, they need it done like now, I would go with the bottom photo because the horizon's much closer and it looks a lot closer. So it's higher up in the image. And all you have to do is just move the image or crop the image to take out some of the foreground to make it look farther away. So that's a really cool way to do it. But you also have to make sure that you are, you're using it appropriately. It doesn't always work. This doesn't always work, how do I say this? If you do it once or twice, it's not really going to matter much. Again, it's just a little bit of an influence, a little bit of a nudge that tends to be effective. But one thing I do have to caution you with on this is, remember when I mentioned salience, right? Meaning. So even though the image doesn't always have to be explicitly about the service or product, it does need to relate to it and have a positive meaning and also be on the mind of the target audience. Here's a really good example. And the question was, does this work with stock photos? Oh yeah, I use stock photos a lot because it's sometimes we have an abstract service, you can't find a photo. But with what I was saying about salience, going back to salience, the thing about salience is make it positive. Because I learned this the hard way when I was doing my master's thesis. I did a study on actually haptic cues in advertising for professional services, specifically lawyers and doctors. And one of the images was of a doctor handing you a prescription. So I thought, hey, it's going to have, it's a haptic cue. It's close. It's going to be more effective, especially for people who had gone to a doctor recently or need a doctor. Actually, it did have an effect, but the exact opposite. That image had the lowest purchase intention of anything else, even just straight text ad. Because I realized if the doctor's giving you a prescription, you're sick. Negative connotation. Plus, I kind of did that study in the middle of the COVID pandemic, which actually probably wasn't a good idea. So, yeah, it was on everyone's mind and no one wanted to get sick. And then here's an ad implying that you're sick. So guess what? It dropped. So you got to be careful. Keep it positive. Make sure it's, meaningful for the client. And then if you do that, it will increase the client's purchase intention and make your proposal that much more successful. So now we're going to go to different senses. So we talked about visual, now we're going to talk about language. So remember the activity that we had earlier when we remembered the list of objects? So I want to ask you, what was the third item on the list? So 3, tree, what's in a tree? Put it in the comments if you remember. Oh, come on, guys. You're making me look bad. Chair, yes. Okay. Yes. Okay, so let's talk about 8. 8, gate. What's on the gate? 8, gate. What's on the gate? Okay, people are still writing chair. That's good. Oh, there's okay, that's good. That was paper. Yes, that's it. Okay, we'll do one more. 10. What was number 10? Pen, yes. See, and so there we go. There's that list, and so you can see by tying the verbal information to something more sensory like visual, you remember it. So what I want to get to this is language that evokes the senses such as touch, taste, or anything else can make your proposal more impactful because people remember it. The more senses you use, the more you remember it. And remember that thing I said about psychological distance and the images? Well, that also works with senses. So sensory language, close versus far. So taste and touch are close. So if it's a service or a project that has a fast turnaround and you're close and the perceived distance or the client's perceived distance is small, go with language that evokes taste or touch, like rock solid approach, phrases like that. If it's something far away, like long-term planning, you could see the clear path ahead. Phrases like that evoke sight or sound will be more effective. And so you always want to match the distance and the sense. So that's the cool thing about, using sensory language. It makes it more memorable, and can also reinforce the psychological distance, which will in turn increase the purchase intention or basically make the client kind of more likely to go with you. So yeah, make it stickier. I don't know if I do that one, but you never know. remember salience too, like, and keep it positive. So if it's something they're not going to like. So here's the thing. So, where does this leave us? Now that we looked at a few of these superstitions or quote unquote best practices. Well, if you don't remember anything else, just walk away with this. Understanding why something is a best practice is just as important as knowing what the best practice is. And evaluating the evidence for a best practice, either for or against, is critical, because then you understand the relative strengths and weaknesses. Just because something's a great best practice doesn't mean it's applicable in every situation. And something that's not always good, but it might be appropriate in some situations as well. So always understand where it came from and what is it, how strong is the evidence behind it. And also, each step gets you closer. One of these best practices alone won't win a proposal. Like I mentioned earlier, you do it once or twice, whatever. It's not really going to do anything. But if you do it again and again consistently, it will add up and you will have a higher chance of winning. You just have to use the appropriate best practice at the appropriate time. This is the difference if you see two different proposals. You have one that's, okay, yeah, they answer the mail, but then you see one that you can't, figure out why, but it just reaches out to you. I like that French term, je ne sais quoi. Like, it has that imperceptible quality about it that just makes it stand out. That's what you're going to start getting if you start using these best practices at the appropriate time. So you really got to understand when they're appropriate and when you should use them. And so if you want to learn more, I pulled about 5 sources that really I got a lot of information from, not so much about this presentation, but really these 5 books really kind of opens your eyes a bit on how people think and make decisions. The one thing, if you only read one, go with the second one on the list, Perceptions of Warmth and Competence. It's a book called The Human Brand. That is used in marketing, that is used in actually strategic communications. I had a professor that was a jury consultant. They use that concept. It works very well. And then also, and I'm not going to go through all these, but I did have some references throughout the presentation. I don't want you to take my word for it. I want you to, if you feel so inclined, go and read it. Go look through it. And so here's the information to look it up if you want. So all here and then here. So these are all the articles I referenced. There's much more, but so go ahead and read them out. The one thing I would caution against, Spectre, Paul submitted rating scale. That's about doing surveys. If you want to read it, you can get it for free. But if you have trouble going to sleep at night, that's the book for you. Trust me. And then, so there's that. And then with that, thank you so much for your time and listening to me ramble about this. And happy to answer any questions you have.
Yeah, Sean, thank you so much for this. I think that there are so many of these quote unquote best practices that I have personally just questioned through my whole career. One, I think that I've even told you about, was that I worked at this company that one time made me wear museum gloves when I was assembling the paper RFPs, because they said if I left fingerprints on the back, if I left fingerprints on the back cover, that it would make us lose. And here's where I had some umbrage. I took some umbrage to this, is that we actually lost to a handwritten bid for a multi-million-dollar airport paving project at that organization. And we lost to a handwritten bid, and I was wearing museum gloves to assemble the documents. And I was like, there is a disconnect here.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. Something similar, like I always, I was at a place where they would harp on spelling, grammar, all the little nitpicky things. And I'm sitting there, I'm like, you haven't given me, I'm reading this and I don't see any coherent message or value proposition as to why the client should hire us. And you're worried about spelling?
Yeah. There's so many elements about I think there is a really strong component here of how to communicate this to leadership as well, because I would constantly get this feedback of well, this list needs to be in bullets instead of instead of semicolons or whatever. And I'm like, okay, yes, I'll take that feedback. That's fine. And I think also we really need to think about the message, because literally I've won proposals where I got the client's name wrong on the cover because number one, we had a relationship. Like, this is why I don't take all this stuff so seriously. We had a good relationship. We dialed in the message and we knew what they were looking for. And we submitted a proposal that was compliant, and that wasn't on the checklist of like things that disqualify you. So we were fine. And Jen here says, great point. Grammar won't save you if the messaging is garbage. Absolutely. And Sean, I think even you and I may have been talking about this concept of Parkinson's law. Was this we talked about it on LinkedIn? The bike shedding effect.
Oh, yeah.
The bike shedding effect, which is where folks in the room will go to the most trivial topic because everybody understands it and it's like easy to discuss. Mm-hmm. And that's I think at the crux of what we see with this proposal management superstition stuff, is that people just aren't willing to engage with those higher order concepts, and they refuse, like in a lot of fields like engineering, they refuse to kind of engage with those higher order marketing concepts. And as a consequence, we end up with like, well, don't use the color red. Like, that's not helpful.
One thing that I found myself saying one time, and I've been saying it a lot since, is trying to walk through an engineering firm and doing a rebrand. Mm-hmm. And pick the colors. I'm like, no. Why did the clients hire us? What do they like about us? And I ended up telling them, like, look, a lot of the tangible details come from the intangible. So like a lot of that abstract, things that it's hard to get your arms around actually leads to those tangible details so that they're consistent and actually make sense. And sometimes it's hard to get, because, and look, you got like an engineer, like I work in the engineering field. So an engineer, you don't want them necessarily, when you're designing a bridge, you don't necessarily want to be that abstract. You want to be like, okay, right, cut and dry, boom. It's a different thought process. But I think, kind of almost to a point you made earlier, when people tell you, oh, do this, mm-hmm. A lot of times, I think that's why I started going into more of the research, mm-hmm. is to say, well, no, here's the data behind this, prove it. Everyone has the opinion, but let's prove it.
Yeah, I think there's one skill that I see a lot of folks in this space missing, and this is not a dig on anybody. It's cultivate this skill and your life will be easier. It's actually two parts. Number one, we've got to get some data analysis chops, even just like basic statistical analysis, so that you can actually prove, like you were talking about with your go no go, because that is such a superstition. It's like, well, if it comes up as positive, then we have to chase it, and if it comes up as negative, we should never chase it. Yeah. But it's like, no, all right, there might be some wiggle room there.
Yeah. Here's an example of that. Like, I did a go no go form, mm-hmm. and I got it to a correlation, mm-hmm. and then I started doing a linear regression. So basically, mm-hmm. I knew that 3 questions led to about 50% of whether or not we won or lost a project, according to this data. That doesn't mean it's all the time, but when I looked at that, those were consistently the lowest scores. So I said, hey guys, focus here. So you focus your efforts, and that's how we were able to like really increase our win rates. So there is, and the cool thing too, when I was doing all the debriefs, there's something, and thank God ChatGPT came out, because I used to have to do this by hand, is I would literally I would categorize break down every single comment in an interview, qualify it, and then basically say how many times was this mentioned, how many times was this mentioned, and it matched the go no go results pretty well.
Oh my gosh! Okay, wait a second. Can you say what you just said again? Like what did you do? You pulled the interview results.
So you take the interview results, right? Uh-huh. When you do like your debriefs. Uh-huh. Okay. So why did we lose? I like having some standard questions, but not too many. But at least you have some data points. And what you do is you take results. I took the results from like 20, 30 interviews. Uh-huh. It took a lot of time, but sure. I broke down. There's a method I was taught, but now ChatGPT does it in like 30 seconds. But like you break it down into categories, and you see, and so you kind of fit these categories together, and you look at, okay, so how many times was this mentioned? How many times was this mentioned? How many times was this mentioned? And you get a count. It's like a bar chart, basically.
So like a sentiment analysis.
Kind of, yeah.
Okay.
Or even a word count, word cloud, basically it's, you're able to look at everything else said and break it into categories, and then see how many times that category is mentioned. And what you find is that those categories pretty well match your go no go results, at least in my case. So that's when I knew I would go back, say, guys, look, I keep telling you, stop going after this stuff. Look at this, like this is why.
Could you actually work backwards from that? Like take your debriefs and help that to generate this is like an iterative approach. Oh, thank goodness somebody's saying this. Thank you.
You do the data analysis once, and then you're not. No, you have to keep doing it because going. That's a point in time. And I did see a message. Love to know the 3 questions. Maurice, if I can remember them, it was like we met with the client at least 6 months before the RFP was released. I think that was one. And then it was we can identify 5 needs and how to meet that and how to meet them. I don't remember what the 3rd one was. It was probably something. I mean, I think that was a lesser, but those 2 were pretty significant. Yeah. And because the 5 needs, because a lot of the comments we got back was you didn't understand the scope that well.
Oh my gosh. Okay. I love this. This is the thing is that in this industry, if I'm honest with you, the lack of focus on data just drives me bonkers because anytime I've presented data to these engineering leaders or a tech leader in my space, and I've said, hey, this is the trend, or this is the analysis that I did of like revenue versus people being late on their proposals, or anytime we tie data to this type of practice, we end up getting the results that we want, and folks take us more seriously, and it elevates the profession. And so Karen says, please do a webinar on just that subject. We will have Sean back. 100%. I 1000% agree, Karen, that is something that we definitely want to bring forward.
And the thing too that I look at is, one of my best friends, he got his MBA, and I was talking about what I was doing with the go no go, and he was like, what do you mean that's no one else really does that? I'm like, no. So the thing is, I think we are a little behind, especially at like AEC, like other types of proposals, other firms. I could be wrong. I don't know. I spent my career in AEC marketing. We're kind of behind. Like a lot of other types of marketing firms do what I'm talking about. And it's standard practice, whereas I'm trying to like fight with people to prove that we need to do, and this is why. And I think some of it too is, I'll be honest, I didn't plan on going into this industry. I just kind of ended up in there. I just ended up here, and I think that's a lot of us, which is fine. That's nothing wrong with that at all. But I kind of got to the point where I was like, no, I am a marketing professional. This is what I need to do. So I kind of took it on me to like really learn what I could do and new ideas I could put in the industry. Sometimes it's an uphill battle and frustrating, but sometimes you just gotta, I tell people, and hopefully there's no engineers on the call, it's like, you have to be more stubborn than the engineer. How you do it. You just keep going, keep going. And once you start showing results, it starts kind of building up. But data is like, there's so much you can do that we're not, and it's a huge untapped opportunity, I think, for the industry.
Yeah, and that's the reason why folks think that they can just say like, oh, the comma placement made us lose, is because there's no evidence to the contrary. Right. But if we start this, and again, this is like what we're trying to do here at Pi, if I'm honest with you, is like we have this long-term vision of how do we help elevate this profession and help people, because I know a lot of us like complain about us not feeling like we get taken seriously. And I think one really big component and one way to kind of like start shifting that narrative more intentionally is for us to say that, hey, there's data that surrounds this stuff. Hey, there's the getting rid of these superstitions helps us move forward in a more reasonable way. And that also helps you like root out those superstitions from the organizations, because like Sean and I can tell you this stuff, right? We can say like, we don't know that like counting the number of words in your present, or the number of times that the client's name appears in your proposal and then doing a ratio of your name to their name is actually it's not effective. Like that's like a superstition. And I think it's really useful for us to start thinking about, okay, all right, let's discard some of those things so that we can actually move forward and start being more thoughtful. Sabrian says here, to Carrie's point about using the perception of risk to your advantage. Okay, how do we balance the principles when we're approaching the issue of risk and using it to portray our firm more favorably, like for a forensic project? How do we use negative connotations in a measured and intentional way? Ooh, that is a deep question. Thank you, Sabrian.
Because I got to be honest, that's a question I've been struggling, because, I know that people, here's an example. would you work a second job so you don't lose your car? Or would you work a second job to buy a second car? Most people wouldn't work a second job to buy a second car, but they would work a second job to save their car. You're more motivated by preventing a loss. But so that's a hard balance, because I don't know if I've come up with a really good or easy answer to that, because on one hand, it is more motivating to prevent a risk, but if you come off negative, it's actually not as effective. There is one of the books I listed in was called Immersion by Dr. Paul Zak. It's on I gave the list. So it's kind of funny, because if you open the book and you look at the dedication, it's dedicated to Dr. Jorge Barraza. Dr. Barraza was actually my thesis advisor. So it's their company. What they do is they're into neuromarketing. So Dr. Zak and Dr. Barraza figured out a way with an Apple iWatch to accurately estimate oxytocin levels. And so what they do is they expose you to a bunch of ads or music videos and things like that. And based on that, they can predict more accurately whether or not it will be successful. So what they found is high oxytocin levels, meaning, that gains trust, so high, and also, you increase oxytocin levels, by the way, by making things into a story. So that thing about that superstition about making your project examples read like a story, there's actually data, a lot of data behind that. But it's hard, because what they found is if you're negative and you get their attention, it can decrease purchase intention. So you got to walk a fine line. And just looking, yes, ghost a competitor, that is a good way. That is a way. But what I found too, I've done a situation where we came up with a huge risk for the project, and we mentioned it. We didn't get hired, and I was debriefing, and I didn't get a straight answer until much later, and it's basically they were mad because they felt we told them they were dumb. So you got to be really careful. It's not. And that was my first response. Okay, we do this. We're the only ones that can do it. We figured it out, and it backfired. So I don't have a really coherent answer. So what I tend to do is, if I see a risk, hey, here's the risk, here's the solution, and this is your benefit, I go back to the old win theme formula. Okay, here's the need. Hey, here's this risk. Here's how we can meet it, and here's how it's going to benefit you. And I will do some language like preventing a loss, hey, we're gonna reduce project risk. We're gonna reduce the risk of you losing money because you had to pay extra money for blah blah blah. So there are some messaging that you can do, but you have to use it sparingly. And I usually flip it around to making it a positive, but it is hard. So I unfortunately don't have a really good answer. I think my gut, and again, it's my gut, so take it with a grain of salt, it depends on the situation. It depends on, your client best, the situation best. I don't want to say something in a blanket statement. It's you gotta use your judgment. And I think that's the thing, as us proposal writers and managers is, we have judgment to exercise, and, just as an engineer, or a technical person will, use their judgment because they just have done it so much, they have a feel for it. There is sometimes something valid to that. Not always, but sometimes you just take it for what it is, and sometimes we have to do the same.
Yeah, I think the proof is in the pudding when it comes to those debriefs, for sure.
Yeah, insurance comment, goes to the competitor, if it's the client, you're the only one to have to identify the risk. That can work too. I've had times when it didn't work, but I also had times when it did. So that is a valid way to do it. It's just, it depends on the situation. I thought that was the way to go every time, and then I was way freaking wrong. All
right, Sean, we're reaching the top of the hour. And so what I would love to do is let's help folks in the community here connect with you. Where's the best place to get a hold of you for additional questions, conversations? Because I know you've been so generous with your time with me, and I'm so grateful for that. And we've had a lot of great discussions. And if other folks want to reach out to you, and we're going to have you back for this debriefs informing the go no go. So please, everybody, just like stay tuned. But yeah, where do we find Sean?
Okay, so you can reach me. Best way probably just LinkedIn. And I left my LinkedIn profile on the PowerPoint. So I can send you the PowerPoint if you want to provide that to everyone, and then we can definitely connect that way. You just click the link here.
Yeah. Sounds great. Yeah, we'll make sure that all that information gets out to the folks that are attending today. And it looks like the event may have ended. And so I think we're actually just recording now. So we overshot it a little bit, which is totally fine. But anyway, everybody enjoy the rest of your day. Be safe, not sorry. And we will see you next time on our Proposal Industry Experts Education Series. Let's get this outro going and then we'll be finished.